Hey y'all, I'm Kat.
And I'm Michelle. Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Bama Blue Dots. Today, we're excited to welcome Dakarai Larriett, who is running for Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. Dakarai, thank you so much for joining us today. To start, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what issues are driving your campaign, and what inspired you to run for Senate?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Kat and Michelle. It's great to be here. Well, a little bit about me. I love the state so much, and I just want to see all of us do better. The last couple of years, single party rule has not worked out well for the state. I would say specifically the moment that really made me want to run for office was my wrongful arrest a couple years back. In that process of just talking to Alabamians all over the state, I started to realize all of the broken systems that we do have here in addition to our criminal justice system. I actually polled hundreds of folks and came up with a policy proposal that really is resonating with people. It's focused on education, healthcare, and the economy. My background is someone who graduated with honors and couldn't even find a job in the state and had to move to New York City to build a career. So I was able to come back in the pandemic, and I'm looking forward to giving back to the community while I'm here.
Thank you so much for that. From your perspective, what are the biggest issues facing Alabama right now? And how do those compare to the biggest challenges you think the country is dealing with?
Well, for us, it truly is education. I was really surprised to see that in a very large poll of folks, they agreed with me. We understand that, frankly, it's been a generation that we have not invested in our young people. We're seeing the output in our crime statistics, and it ends up being an economic issue. We don't have the skills to attract the right businesses. And this economic depression that we're in has so many ramifications. So that is really it. And we've got to invest early, make sure that everyone gets a fair shot, make sure that college is attainable, that you're not just saddled with debt when you graduate, and then that you actually have an opportunity in state because we export so much talent from our great schools to Georgia, to New York, like I did. So that's where we really have to start. And it takes a generation. In my experience, my grandfather went to a three-room Roosevelt school, eighth grade education, being invested in my mom. She earned a master's, she became an educator, and she invested in me. That's a 40-year process. We've got to start now.
Now, as a U.S. Senator, you won't necessarily have direct governing power over the state of Alabama, but not only will you possess a ton of influence in the state, you will also have the power to impact our state from the national front. We do want to start out by focusing on a couple of Alabama specific issues, and we want to start with Alabama Power. Right now, many people are outraged by the issues regarding the Public Service Commission, corruption within Alabama Power. Alabamians are paying more than anybody else in the country. It's a struggle for some of them to literally keep the lights on. How do you plan to help Alabamians who are struggling to keep their lights on right now?
Well, this is a great opportunity for compare and contrast. I'm not married to a lobbyist for Alabama Power, as Katie Britt is. I am all about advocating for Alabamians. Affordability is the third pillar in the campaign right after healthcare. Utilities have become increasingly unattainable for Alabamians. And I keep hearing about folks choosing between food and power. And I live in a one-bedroom apartment. I've never seen such sky-high utility bills. It is unbelievable. Something's going on. We've got to use our investigative powers. That is something that we do have federally. Also, who is receiving donations from Alabama Power? I think every single sitting member, whether it's in the House or the Senate, needs to really look into this because they all get that PAC money from Alabama Power. And finally, even in areas I may not have specific control of where it may be a states' rights matter, I certainly still have the bully pulpit. I have that now. And so I've spoken out on these issues in my social media and will continue hammering them.
Because it's ridiculous. I didn't know about Katie Britt's husband being a
Yes.
lobbyist for them until today. How the
Yes. As well as day trading banking stocks when Brett sits on the banking committee. So it's just conflict after another.
and she's the better of the two.
It's relative.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
but I said not. I didn't say she's good. I'm saying she's better of the two that we currently
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
That doesn't. It's not necessarily. I think that says more about the other person than her.
That's where we are. Well, frankly, if to piggyback on that, when people say, "Well, how dare you? Like, how do you think that you're in a position to run for Senate?" I say, "Well, I have 20 years of experience in public service and advocacy, from eradicating homelessness issues, food insecurity, education, public health. I fought the opioid crisis as a board member with the National Harm Reduction Coalition, 20 years in corporate America, leading large teams at the Fortune 500, Whirlpool, L'Oreal, Louis Vuitton." So that's my resume. I'm ready to go. I've been doing this work for 20 years from the outside. Now I want to be in a position at the table where I can write the laws and officially administer justice.
Kind of like you've seen the bullshit within corporate America. So, both of us kind of have a similar thing.
Uh,
We've had to play the game, and we realize the game is rigged.
Oh,
I've
for
been
sure.
executive leadership as well
Yeah.
when they have chosen who they're going to lay off and then ship the jobs overseas.
Yeah.
Also, they can continue to write themselves a larger check. It wasn't because they were suffering or anything else like that. They just wanted more money.
Oh, yeah.
So that leads us into our next question. Another issue Alabama has unfortunately become known for is its prison systems. Over the past several years, it's really come to light what's going on here in this state between ongoing reports of violence, overcrowding, and corruption within Alabama's prisons. I mean, we had a whole documentary made about it. From your perspective, is prison reform something that should be addressed primarily at the state level, or do you believe there's a role for the federal government in improving conditions and oversight? And if so, what tools does Congress actually have to help push that reform forward?
Well, you can't make this up. We were sued by the first Trump administration by Jeff Sessions. That's just how egregious our quote unquote Department of Corrections is.
Wait,
So,
what?
yes,
How did I not know about that? Now,
that's how
Grant,
bad
to
it
be
was.
fair, Jeff Sessions feels like a character from 100 years ago. I'd forgotten all about that guy. But wait, what happened?
Yeah. So anyway, that is essentially what triggered a lot of the discussion and investigations. Now, of course, these days they're not actioning it. So again, this is a place where I can lend weight from Washington and say, "Hey, Department of Justice, what happened to that lawsuit? What's the latest? How are we
Mhm.
holding Alabama accountable, ensuring that they do not violate the Constitution?" Because if you saw the Alabama solution, you know that these are unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual conditions. And I said the exact same thing to the senators and to the representatives when I went down to our state house last year. And this was before the documentary, but I just started hearing as I was touring the state about the conditions and how it really is so horrible for all of us. And I was able to share my experience of wrongful arrest and what a broken criminal justice system looks like, and how I don't want that to happen in our state. What I've been able to learn since that time is just how to articulate that this impacts all of us. We have incarcerated people who are essentially competing with us for work. So they suppress our wages at places like Hyundai, in the food service industry, because they're out working for $2 a day. Then to make it even worse, we're paying for their housing, 50,000 to 100,000 a year for these individuals. And then to make it even worse, the $57 million that we've spent in defending corrections attorneys for abusing people, that comes out of our tax. It is really, really horrific.
I absolutely agree with you. It always confounds me when people support or even try to defend what we have. And I'm like, you do realize this is your pockets. About you don't, yeah, don't want to pay for SNAP, but you want to subsidize and pay for all
Yeah.
this.
But like
Yes,
these are the
corporations.
kinds of conditions that we invade other countries because of. We
Exactly.
place sanctions on other countries when we see these kinds of conditions.
Mhm.
It's ridiculous.
And the final takeaway is, it's called the Department of Corrections. Is it correcting these individuals and making us safer? If
Yeah.
it did that, you could make some type of argument, but it doesn't. We're one of the most violent states, the most violent system. The individuals come out more hardened if they get out, because the parole process is so corrupt. We're not safer. We're spending a lot of money for this, and then we're hurting our own wages. Like, how does anybody win from this besides, I guess, the politicians that get the donations from the prison industrial complex, the people who get the contracts to build the prisons, the lawyers who get the contracts to defend the corrections officers? Like, they're winning, we're not winning.
Yeah.
While we're talking about the broader justice system, many Americans are also debating policing and accountability. Do you think there are national reforms that could help rebuild trust between communities and law enforcement?
Yes, and I've already started to author my own legislation, and it's available on my website. It's called the Motorist Bill of Rights. And what this does is it protects all of us, law enforcement as well as the public, through accountability and transparency. And one of the highlights of my bill is the release of information. So we've seen time and again that body and dash cam is weaponized against the public, it's withheld for a very long time, or it's edited. And that was the case when I was wrongfully arrested. So I want to have all evidence uploaded to a neutral third party cloud. That way, defense attorneys can grab it, they know what's happening, and they can hold law enforcement accountable. And it just makes us all safer. We know what to expect from these interactions. We know that we're going to be recorded and that everyone will ultimately see the truth of the engagement.
Absolutely. We had a friend of ours, another content creator, her friend was shot on his property. The police literally walked in and it ended up in a shootout.
They said they found it open door and were in there to investigate.
It was a cut padlock on the outside of a door when that was the only door, and he was in there sleeping. How do you
Mm.
padlock a door with only one exit?
He opened fire against the cops because he thought he was being robbed.
I think I heard that story.
Yeah, it's Glitter Pixie.
Pretty crazy, and they won't release the body cam footage.
Yes, that
Shocking.
should not be an option. They have all of these different laws, and it'll be like, well, we're in an investigation and we can't release it. Well, we're trying to find truth in this
Mhm.
situation. We need to see that video. And not that it has to go public, but a defender, a public defender, a defense attorney. In my case, I was suing for damages. I should have been able to see that video, and
Oh,
they'll never release the video of me being tortured in the jailhouse.
Some of your advocacy on civil rights and policing come from a personal experience that you had in Michigan. If you're comfortable sharing, could you tell our listeners what happened and how that experience shaped your proposal for a motorist bill of rights?
Yes, absolutely. So interestingly, I was living in Alabama at the time. I was driving through Michigan and was just apprehended by the police. It was a profiled stop. They put me through 7 sobriety tests. They gaslit me and led me to believe that I was somehow failing the test. And I asserted my sobriety all night. They handcuffed me, took me to a local hospital. I tested negative on site. They didn't tell me until I asked for the results to see them. And then they said, well, we think you're on marijuana, and it's going to take 2 weeks to get the results for that. So they jailed me. In the process, they accused me of trafficking drugs by way of ingestion, forced me to use the restroom publicly in the booking area in front of the troopers, other incarcerated people, and booking officers, and yelled at me, "Don't flush," which became the name of my book that talks about that night. It's been my journey for 2 years now, fighting for justice, realizing just how broken this system is. I advocated all the way up to Governor Whitmer's office, the governor of Michigan, met with so many legislators, police forces, and simply no one wanted to take accountability. Everyone rallied around the police. That really was my kind of kick in the butt that I have to run to change the laws. And so many people ask me, well, why not do this in Birmingham? Why not do something statewide? We're never going to change these laws within the state of Alabama. In fact, we just passed HB 202, expanding qualified immunity in our state, not only for law enforcement, but also for corrections officers. So we've got to take something federal and cascade it down to the states. And in fact, a new Back the Blue Act is coming through the federal Congress right now. Katie Britt and Tommy Tuberville are co-sponsors. So another point of comparison. They want to expand qualified immunity federally, and I want to protect Americans.
Beyond the Motorist Bill of Rights, what other policy ideas or initiatives are you currently developing as part of your campaign?
As I mentioned before, this is what has inspired me to run, but public service is about listening. And that's what I've been doing for 20 years, serving on boards in community organizations. So when we did our survey, it was clear we've got to make college affordable and accessible as well as pre K. This starts with actually funding a Department of Education. My role as senator will be confirming qualified leaders, not wrestlers or wrestling administrators, I guess, but a qualified leader, ideally a teacher, an educator to lead a strong Department of Education that sets standards and holds the states accountable. And then healthcare. Number one, day one task, and hopefully this is done way before I get into office, is we've got to extend the ACA subsidies. and ensure that Americans have an open enrollment period and they can get care this year. Believe it or not, we are in the third month now, and so many people stopped getting care because they simply could not afford the premium increases. This campaign is about making healthcare accessible, reversing all of these hospitals that are closing in the rural areas of our state, fully funding Medicaid and Medicare, and then creating a pipeline to single payer system. We're not going to do it overnight, but I want to execute some test cases throughout the country, get people excited about it, and then continue the rollout. And then finally, the economic opportunity piece. So ensuring that we're growing smartly. We're advocating for funds, we're bringing in businesses into our state, but also ensuring that we're investing in the right infrastructure. So this is something I hear about Northern Alabama a lot is we can't keep pace with the growth, and folks who already live there can't afford to stay in their communities and in their homes.
On this show, we've talked a lot about the state of the healthcare in Alabama. There are multiple counties that don't even have access to emergency care, and others where maternal care is extremely limited or non existent. A lot of people point to Alabama's decision not to expand Medicaid as a major factor. In your view, would expanding Medicaid be enough to address these problems, or do we need to be thinking about a broader solution to fix healthcare access in our state?
Well, expanding Medicaid, Medicare is critical. So we have one of the most stringent requirements to get on those programs, those life-saving programs. Compared to some of our neighboring states like Tennessee and Mississippi, it is much, much easier. So, meaning you can make more money and still qualify for these programs. So, a lot of people get stuck in this gray zone where they're still, for all intents and purposes, impoverished, but they can't get care. I agree that is a big piece of it, but the infrastructure has got to be shored up. When I moved back to the state, I was trying to book my very first primary care visit, non emergency, and I was told that it was a 9-month lead time to see a doctor. That is from 5, 6 years ago. So it's only gotten worse, I'm sure. We've got to ensure that we are funding our healthcare properly. And that is why I went to Washington and protested the big, beautiful bill. That is a big piece of why we're having an escalation in closures. The cost sharing rules have shifted, meaning that the states carry a heavier burden. And in exchange, billionaires get tax cuts. I would certainly push for a repeal of the big, beautiful bill or many parts of it.
And in your opinion, at the federal level, what role should a U.S. Senator play in helping states like Alabama stabilize rural hospitals and expand access to care?
Well, that's one of the areas I can really play a big role is in the funding and setting the right mindset. And again, who do we confirm? Not the likes of Robert F. Kennedy. I will only confirm professionals, ideally doctors and scientists and people who understand public health, who believe in vaccines, for example. Those are the types of folks that I want leading our healthcare agencies. I will advocate for the dollars every single day, including research dollars. That drives a lot of our economy. I think about UAB. I live right in the shadow of UAB in downtown Birmingham. That has been quite an interesting topic as I call donors and folks in the community. They're so shaky now around whether they're going to have funding for projects or whether they can mention certain words if they're applying for funding or a grant.
And I know this is kind of a throw in question, Kat, but I'm sitting here thinking about people who glom on to like Dr. Oz and RFK. Normally, what you hear them say is like big pharma, big pharma. And I do agree that our pharmaceuticals and the companies that run them, they have way too much power. I think they're afraid of the wrong thing when it comes to big pharma. Like, how do you reassure them?
They're doing
Yeah.
the same thing like Pizzagate.
Yeah.
They make you scared
Mm.
of something else so that you don't see what's actually going on.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
by blaming everything on Big Pharma, they're making it look like they're trying to kill us. They're trying to kill us by emptying our pockets,
Right.
not by like putting microchips in vaccines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's where
Like-
science comes into play.
Right. But I mean, you can talk science all day long to some
Yeah.
people, and they do not get it at all. How do you reassure them that it's not about letting the boogeyman back in the door? It's about accountability on both sides, right? It's
Mm.
making sure that we're doing right by everybody.
I agree. I agree. And I think just having like these dialogues, these town halls is so important. I've never seen a Brit or a Tuberville town hall. And that's the first step in building trust. I learned that in corporate America over a 20-year career is having those regular conversations with your staff and team. And we're missing that. And it's really surprising. You think about it, Tuberville is supposedly a coach. That's what he calls himself in the Senate. I would expect at least a quarterly town hall or an opportunity to learn more from him. I don't hear a thing Contrast that with Terry Sewell. So she's in the community, she's active. I have a good relationship with her staff. I stop by and visit them when I'm in Washington, and I know that I can get the latest from her, even if it's a newsletter. So that I think will solve many of the issues and resolve some of the concerns around what's happening with our healthcare.
I mean, personally, I think RFK is doing a great job. I mean, did you see that video he did with Kid Rock?
Oh, it was lovely.
That was that made me want to go out and buy some whole milk right then.
Go
Yeah.
swim in some sewage water.
That was the dumbest shit I've
They were like in jeans or
Okay.
something in the
Yes,
water.
like getting in the
Wow.
ice plunge. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go on a quick little sidetrack real quick. I have this conspiracy theory that like whenever they need a description from the Epstein files, they were like, okay, just release Bobby to the press. Just let Bobby do a press junket.
Yeah.
You know he's gonna say some weird shit. You know he's gonna create a distraction. We can't think of
Yeah.
anything to distract right now. So let's just release him to let's just let him out of his cage. Because he's
Yeah.
gonna do something stupid. So we could spend an entire episode talking only about the issues in this state that stem from Republican failures. For decades, Alabama's been primarily run by and represented by Republicans. Republicans whose policies have led Alabama to rank close to last on every quality of life scale. And yet people are still voting for them overwhelmingly. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Democrats have such a hard time winning in this state?
We're not well organized. I came into that understanding I would not have party support, I would not have technical support, I would not get money from them. I knew all of that before I decided to run. The party leadership were very transparent with me, and I appreciate it. And I've just been able to see it up close over the last year and a half. We're just not organized to win. We hear a lot about infighting and power struggles and people being deposed. So that is essentially it. I think that our policies are certainly the winning policies, but how do we communicate them? How do we support candidates? It's not happening.
For sure. And I know that there's, been issues with gerrymandering too and things like that.
Yes.
And voter suppression, obviously. But I think there's more to it than just that. People are always complaining about leadership letting them down. We see it, I'm thinking about like the Facebook groups. But even though they're complaining about leadership letting them down, they're still voting for whoever has the R in front of their name on the ballot.
Yeah.
Like every election, more than half of this state shows up to the polls to vote for a party that is actively doing the exact things they regularly complain about.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many people in this state regularly vote against their own best interests? And is there a way for Democrats to break through to these people?
Well, I still assert that the Republicans are committed to winning by any means necessary. And that includes dumbing down folks and not offering a strong civics background so people don't understand the process and what they're doing. And we're one of 6 states that still has straight party voting and our strict ticket voting. So you don't even have to use your brain. You just go into the ballot box and tick off one bubble and you're done for the day. You're not thinking about and assessing who has the right skills, who has the right resume to represent you and work for you. We have just got to do better, I think, in communicating what we bring to the table as progressives, as Democrats, organizing better, getting people registered. My campaign has really been about talking to people who don't normally see themselves in the process. So young people, urban people, we're at colleges every single week, and we're building a really good volunteer network in the universities.
There's certainly no shortage of important issues facing Alabama, and we could spend an entire episode digging into them, but we're going to shift gears for a moment and talk about how those issues connect to the work happening in Washington. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Dakarai Larriett about his vision for serving Alabama in the U.S. Senate.
Hey, welcome back, y'all. Now, we're going to shift our view to more of the national stage. First, though, I want to talk about the issue of states' rights as a whole and how it relates to the federal government, because there seems to now be a bit of confusion with this administration. For decades, the Republicans have been completely in favor of states' rights when it comes to issues like abortion, gay marriage, education, so on and so forth. However, since Trump started his second term, that enthusiasm for state sovereignty seems to only apply to things the GOP wants. They're now trying to restrict the state's abilities to provide abortion drugs, implement their own election and voting policies, make decisions regarding policing and immigration enforcement. Basically, it seems to be a rules for thee, not for me type scenario. Where does the line between the federal government and the state need to be drawn?
That's a good one, and it's very gray. And I think about the new bill coming through here in the state that restricts environmental regulation, and that's a perfect example. So I think that's something that I need to study, the Congress needs to study, and determine to what degree we assert federal versus state rights. But my personal feeling, and when I think about the work I'm doing in policing and law enforcement accountability, is this a universal issue that we need to assert our morals and values from a federal standpoint on? Or is it an issue where it's like interstate? So when I think about the policing issue, I was living in Alabama, but I was traveling in Michigan. It's very confusing as you're moving between states. What are the guidelines? What is a reason to stop someone? What is probable cause in this state, this county, this city?
And it's not a black and white thing. Like, it's a lot of gray area in there because even things like marriage. Buttigieg was talking one time. He said, if I'm in my home state and I cross state lines and I get into a car accident, can my husband see me at the hospital? Like, there are very real consequences to these sorts of things. Yes, there are things that need to be federalized, but it seems like this administration has lost all respect for state sovereignty, unless it's something they want.
I agree.
I've dealt with national level policies that then trickle down to state, that then trickle down to a smaller version. Real estate's a really good one that I lean on a lot. I've never seen it try to undo a policy from the top. If anything, they've added to it. So, like, this is our minimum standard. At this level, we're going to add something to it. At this level, we're going to add just a little bit more, but they've never tried to undo the minimum standard. So I want to stay on that theme for a moment, but look at a specific example of how that tension between federal authority and local governance is playing out in practice. Earlier this year, we saw that conflict surface in Minneapolis when federal immigration enforcement actions resulted in the deaths of 2 civilians and prompted Governor Tim Walz to deploy the National Guard. While leadership changes helped ease some of the immediate tension, the larger debates around the structure and oversight of immigration and customs enforcement hasn't gone away. Critics argue that ICE operates with far less transparency and accountability than any other federal law enforcement agency, and that it lacks the oversight, and that has contributed to repeated allegations of abuse and misconduct. From your perspective, does ICE need to be fundamentally dismantled and replaced, or do you believe it can be restructured in a way that introduces stronger oversight and clear constitutional guardrails?
From the vantage point of being in Congress, we control the power of the purse and we have oversight abilities. I'm sure you're watching the Kristi Noem hearing today. There are a couple things that I would do. I would withhold funding. From what I'm seeing, this is a rogue organization and it has completely lost the trust of America. Imagine if you looked out your window in Alabama and saw ICE coming towards you, even that branding, that logo would not engender trust, it would engender fear. I don't think the organization is relevant anymore. There are other ways to humanely enforce our borders, ensure that those who are dangerous are removed from our country. For starters, I would demand and impeach Kristi Noem. She needs to go. Proper investigations into the murders in Minneapolis need to happen, as well as Los Angeles. And then finally, the longer term piece is creating a real path to immigration that is relevant, that is responsive to our needs for industry within the country. We are an aging society. We need folks to do jobs that we can't do or don't want to do in the country.
My follow-up question, if the solution is to ultimately abolish, what replaces it? Immigration enforcement responsibilities still have to exist somewhere, and within the federal government. Would those functions return to agencies under the Department of Justice, like they were prior to 9/11, or do you envision an entirely new structure for handling immigration enforcement?
Well, the criticisms I've heard is that it's too broad, it's too cloaked in a veil, and accountability just becomes very difficult. I've also just seen and observed the whole industrial complex around it, these, gosh, $100 million facilities that happen to be donors to the Trump administration. So there's a lot to untangle here. And this is the type of thing that have to be solved collaboratively. So I don't have a specific proposal for that at this point in time. But the most important thing is that we are following due process and we are being humane in all of these interactions. And most certainly, we're not harassing citizens and lawful immigrants. Those are the basics.
I say something has to change. It has to, because the way that the organization is operating right now is it's just asinine. And while we're talking about these checks and balances, we do need to discuss also what's going on in the Middle East. We all woke up on Saturday and realized World War III was pretty much starting. There's a lot that's happened since then, and I'm sure there will be more updates between now and when this episode is posted. But right now, there seems to be a discrepancy regarding who can actually declare a state of war. I, like many, was under the impression that it would take an act of Congress, quite literally. Does the president have unilateral control over military action? And when does the legislature need to step in and say, no, you can't touch the button?
This is the work that we've got to do. I think the last 10 years has taught us that operating with these handshakes and norms is not enough because there will be another Trump. So, formally declaring war is an Article 1 power that resides with the Congress. Now, since that time, we've authored legislation like the War Powers Act. We've made updates since 9/11 so that the executive branch would have the authority to go after terrorists. So, we've got to be very clear about this is what you can do because you're in a state of emergency and you need time to act in the space to act very quickly. But what we've seen over the last 10 months, we've had about 10 strikes in 10 different countries: Nigeria, Venezuela,
Mm-hmm.
on and on and on. And the alleged narco terrorist boats. We still don't really have transparency around that. In this particular matter with Iran, the Gang of Eight, so the leaders in the legislative branch, were briefed, but they were not really approached and offered the opportunity to advise. It was already happening. Whereas in Venezuela, they actually were notified. We were notified altogether
Mhm.
after. So it's a mess. And we've got to write this legislation in a way that it's very clear and not left to interpretation anymore. And the oversight, again, we have the power of the purse. We can literally line item stop allowing, for example, the Secretary of, gosh, I hate to even say it, war, travel. We can go down to the line and be like, we're cutting your travel budget until you come to Congress and explain these last 4 or 5 actions you took without our authority.
I don't know if my mental health can take much more of this insanity. The last year feels like it's been a decade. This is not the way it's supposed to be. I mean, government and politics is supposed to be boring. It is
Right.
supposed to be the lamest thing in the world to talk about, to think about. It's supposed to be a snooze,
Yeah.
but it is just consistent insanity. And clearly, there's an issue considering we've built this entire government, this entire structure, assuming that those in power are going to act in good faith. Like,
Yes.
why do most federal employees at the lowest level have to take drug tests, but the Secretary of effing War does not?
Yeah.
Makes no
And
sense.
the head of Doge.
Yeah.
Head of Doge is high on ketamine in the Oval Office. You can't make this up. And I just, frankly, I'm waiting for the documentary.
A janitor in a
Mhm.
federal building has to take drug tests. Why don't the
Right.
people that are running the damn country, why don't the people who have the nuclear codes have to take a
Right.
drug test?
That's a perfect example. Why do we always punish the people who have the least
Yeah.
and are permissible to the people that have the most?
Yes.
We would think that would be
Well, let's be
or
fair.
even. Yeah, like I
Are
was saying,
you accusing them of having double standards, Michelle?
absolutely.
They would never.
It's a huge power dynamic. And I go back to the Epstein files. So we have like a pedophile in chief sitting in the Oval Office, and folks that were named in those files, nothing's happened to them.
Yeah.
But then journalists are arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. That's where we are now.
I'm glad Don Lemon's back home and safe.
He's going to have a long, expensive battle, though,
Mm-hmm.
because the cruelness is the point.
And that's what they're resorting to because they can see they're losing control.
But you saw Dallas last night.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Mhm.
something, there's an emergency and just chaos.
Yeah.
We've got to be so vigilant. And that's what is concerning, that when you don't have a strong party that can write the
Yeah.
lawsuits and observe and advocate for all voters, that's how the other side can take advantage.
That conversation about war powers also raises other issues that many voters are increasingly concerned about, which is the role money plays in shaping foreign policy. While many people disagree with the influence of PACs and lobbying altogether, they remain a major part of the current political system. Transparency around that funding has become especially important when it comes to foreign policy issues. Are you currently accepting money from PACs or large lobbying organizations? And if not, would you commit to refusing that kind of funding during your campaign?
So at this point in the process, we've probably received $20 in PAC money. We have a compliance team and we make sure that we're only accepting money from organizations that are aligned with our goals. When I talk about why we're not winning in this state, while we don't have power, we've got to commit to winning and doing it ethically. If a PAC that's aligned with my values, not a dark money PAC, but a PAC that represents, for example, workers' rights, so I'll be speaking to a union pretty soon, I would accept those funds and use them in a way to win the election.
And this is more specifically about organizations connected to foreign policy lobbying like APAC and a
Yes.
number of affiliated political action groups that support the same agenda, which have played a significant role in our congressional races, even down to county races. We're not immune from it. Some candidates have openly rejected that funding entirely and are speaking out. Would you accept support from APAC or organizations closely aligned with it? Or do you believe candidates should avoid taking funding tied to foreign policy lobbying groups?
I would say big umbrella foreign policy or foreign advocacy is a no-no for us because this is really about Alabama. And then specifically what I've seen from APAC, how they've thrown elections, as we've seen in Missouri and St. Louis in particular, that's not an organization that I want to be in bed with. And frankly, this week is a perfect example. Israel is driving us to constantly be in wars of choice. We've got to think America first. Wasn't that what Trump ran on?
Marco Rubio said it himself. The only reason we struck Iran was because Israel was going to, and then we assumed they would strike us in retaliation.
So rather than telling Israel, don't do that, and we'll cut you off if you do. And frankly, we just heard this is why Harris lost.
Mhm.
So they did the postmortem and they said, you continue to support genocide. And again, as someone who was not elected, who was not getting classified briefings, I called this in early 2024. I said, this is a genocide. Why are we continuing to sell them or supply them or whatever you want to call it with munitions? Again, it goes back to, I believe, taking the money out of the process.
No, I mean, 100%. It pisses me off when I hear people talk about, well, we're sending our money overseas. No, we're actually sending our money to corporations in America to produce these weapons. It's
Mhm.
still not right, though. What you're mad about is correct, but you're not mad at the right aspect of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's it. They do this a lot. Like, we agree that something's bad, but they're just mad about the totally wrong piece of it.
Kind of like I was mentioning earlier, people mad at Big Pharma.
Yeah, exactly. I'm mad at Big Pharma because they make it unaffordable for me to live.
Correct.
Not
Right.
because they're putting tracking devices or microchips into vaccines or some shit like that they
Right.
make.
Correct. Yes. They're lobbying our politicians to allow us to be charged 20 times more than it is overseas.
Right.
So we've got to talk about the current situation with the Senate because I, like many Americans, we are tired of the Senate being ineffective. Going into 2026, there is a lot of pressure on Democrats to perform in the midterms. If the blue wave does happen, what needs to be their first priority?
Well, I think this is where we're very squarely aligned with what's happening in Alabama, healthcare. So, like I said before, I hope and pray that we get the subsidies well before I take the oath. But that is the most immediate need. So many people just dropped healthcare because they couldn't afford the premium increases. We've got to do that. We've got to take actions to repeal the big billionaire bill, which stole our healthcare and gave tax cuts to billionaires. That cost sharing piece is going to be detrimental to the budgets of so many states like our own. In fact, it's estimated Alabama will have a shortfall of $300 million. That means more rural hospitals closing and Medicaid and Medicare expansion. We need to be just as visible and aggressive as Project 2025 was. We need to be clear on what do you get voting in Democrats. I think we've seen in the last year, Trump does not care about norms or, waiting for the Supreme Court or while that's not what I aspire to, I think the perception from folks was that Biden was just kind of wishy washy with student loan forgiveness and programs that really would have benefited people in their pockets in that moment because he didn't want to overreach. So we've got to be bolder. If we can find a legal, ethical opportunity to care for our people, we've got to do it.
And will you push for televised Nuremberg trials? Because that's personally what I'm looking forward to.
Well, yeah, that will be in the purview of there will be criminal trials, and then in the Senate and the House, we'll be bringing all these people back. I mean, this is the thing, though. We've got to make a very specific policy commitment to the people. We have to deliver that. And then we're going to also deliver on the trials and the accountability piece. But people have got to feel very quickly that they're getting something from putting us in office.
Yeah. That's kind of the way that it's always gone. Republicans get into office, screw up the economy, everything's terrible. Democrat gets elected. Democrats not able to fix it quick enough. People get pissed, elect another Republican,
Yep.
lather, rinse, repeat.
Yep.
And it's been this cycle my entire lifetime.
Yep.
And it's really infuriating that other people don't seem to see this. But we can't blame anybody but the Democrats themselves because they have been ineffective at messaging, educating people, and getting people engaged.
Yes. And let me add something there. This made a lot of sense to me when I heard it. Yes, our messaging is not the best, but we also don't control the mediums. So it's the billionaire class, it's the Epstein class, literally, that controls the media now. Think about Washington Post,
CBS.
Instagram, Meta, yes, CBS, Paramount, TikTok, right? Even in the last 2 to 3 days, someone commented to me, well, don't say Alabama Power. That's how you're going to get your posts suppressed. That is a real concern. Again, we've got to use our investigative powers to get into this. We've got to use our antitrust powers as well and oversight and ensure that we have a free media.
Definitely. And then I feel like the Democratic Party has always kind of operated through the lens of blue cities and blue states.
Hmm.
They don't see what it's like down here in deep red Alabama. They tend to, I feel like, overestimate the intelligence of people and they overestimate the engagement of people. I was talking to some people right after the 2024 election, and I work in real estate, and I'm explaining to this other agent in my office why the tariffs are going to hurt the housing market. Well, why didn't Kamala say anything in the debate about that's how tariffs worked? I said, well, that was her opportunity to talk about her platforms and her views, not to give you a basic civics or economics lesson. But I'm wondering if the Democratic Party as a whole needs to reconvene on like how they're going to message to real Americans and not just operate thinking that everybody is the same as blue city, blue state leftists that they are used to surrounding themselves with. Do you think that that's an opportunity for them?
Yes, I agree. I had the pleasure of meeting Ken Martin when he was in Selma last year, and he said that they're committed to investing in the state. I haven't seen it yet. So we'll see. We'll see what the general election looks like. Their dollars, if we get support, but that's critically important. And then there are folks like Tabitha Isner. She's created a new startup that is really teaching civics to folks and in small, non-intimidating environments where people can get together in a nonpartisan group and learn how the government is supposed to work. And when people start to learn that, they typically start to become more progressive. They realize what's not working right now. So I think there are opportunities to communicate better. And if our leaders aren't going to do it, then we're going to have to find some new ways.
Now, that's why Republicans like to defund education. They say that colleges are liberal indoctrination hubs is because you learn about civics. Speaking of the Democratic Party, currently Chuck Schumer is the minority leader in the U.S. Senate. Obviously, if you take it, become the majority leader. However, there's a lot of people who are very unhappy with his leadership or lack thereof. He has been way too willing to cave to the Trump administration. If the Democrats take back the majority in the Senate, do you think that Senator Schumer needs to step down and be replaced with a younger, more progressive senator? If so, who do you think should take his place?
I've gotten this question many times before, but I always ask, who's that individual that actually wants that job. It's not quite as glamorous as everyone thinks it is. It's like corralling cats. And frankly, the more skilled senators would rather run for president. So I don't know who that person would be.
Who would you like to see?
Well, I've said many times before that I do believe that there's an opportunity for a younger leader that's more connected to social media, and that would be clearly Booker. You think about his speech last year that garnered national
Mhm.
and worldwide attention. He actually sat with Schumer when he first joined the Senate and did an assessment on how Democratic leaders were not even engaging on social media and created some guidelines and helped the teams build out their social media platforms so that they were more connected and relevant. Those are some of the skill sets that I think are needed. But again, he likely will be seeking another office.
But are you in favor of the idea of Senator Schumer continuing on as leadership within the Senate, or do you think he needs to step aside?
Well, I think that there's so many things that happen behind the scenes that we just don't even understand. We're just not privy to. And I think it's a hard decision to make one way or the other. But what I would like to see more of is an aggressive approach. And when I think about the healthcare piece, why haven't they voted on ACA subsidies? Why did they agree to stop the shutdown only for a vote in the Senate? Like, that's pretty weak. We haven't
Yeah.
even taken that vote yet. So those are the types of examples that I think don't play well with Americans and give the perception that they're not fighting for us. That's
Mhm.
the feedback I would give. And again, who would do the job? Who would do it better?
And a lot of people have also had similar criticisms about Hakeem Jeffries, and they're especially weary of his ties to APAC. Do you think there needs to be any sort of change of leadership for the Democrats in the House?
Some people are just not set up to be the opposition party. And I think, again, there's a perception of weakness in what we've seen from his leadership in the last year or so. People are looking for more of a fight. They're looking for true representation of their pain and fears that they're seeing from this administration. There have been some missteps for sure. But again, I don't know all the details of what's happening in the
Yeah.
background. I think they may just not be positioned to be opposition leaders.
Do you think there needs to be term limits for senators?
So this is a hot topic, and I think the pragmatic approach is to remove the money from the process. I think that we have term limits. They're called elections. Senators have them every 6 years, representatives every 2 years. When we look at what's happened in the last year, I do not want a weaker legislative branch. And when I've done my research, I've learned that constant turnover that would be required from forcing term limits in a body of 535 people would devastate the legislative branch. We would have a stronger executive, which we do not want. And we would have a very inexperienced and weak legislative branch, which should be the first among equals. So I don't support that at this point in time. I also just don't think it's pragmatic. We as a nation are not passing a constitutional amendment, which is what would be required for term limit changes. We're not there. We just don't have the collaboration to do anything like that. I think the focus is taking the money out of the process. We can get support on that.
What about other branches, such as lifetime appointments, Supreme Court justices? Do you think that they need to be elected to terms or appointed for terms
Hmm.
versus these lifetime appointments? Because Clarence Thomas has had way too long in there to screw everything up for us.
I believe in a judicial code of ethics. If I think pragmatically, can we actually get this over the finish line without exhausting all of our resources on a process that we'll lose on? And you haven't asked me yet, should we impeach Trump? He has 2 years to go. We're never going to remove him. We're not getting 67 votes, right?
Mm.
My approach after 20 years in corporate America is like, what can we do incrementally to make things better? And then over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, we made some real progress. Going after term limits is not the approach I'm going to take. I don't think it, frankly, is going to help me build relationships as a junior senator. I'm here to kick you out of your job. And by the way, can you work with me on these other pieces of legislation that are going to help my state? On principle, I would not be the one leading that initiative. I would be fighting for the judicial code of ethics and taking the money out of the process. Clarence Thomas and his trips and his RV and his mom's house that he was able to sell to a donor.
The question is, how do we enforce that? Because I totally agree that the
Hmm.
real issue is the money in politics.
Hmm.
I wouldn't have so much of an issue with people who serve for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi has been in the House of Representatives longer than I've been alive. I wouldn't have as much of an issue with that if there
Yeah.
wasn't so much corruption and money behind
Yeah.
the scenes. The question is, how do we regulate that? What does that look like?
Municipalities do it. So in New York, there is a cap on how much you can even raise in an election. So the infrastructure is there. If I think back to Mamdani, even, there was
Mhm.
a point when he said, stop sending money. And he said, you can only send it through the PACs.
Mhm.
But the infrastructure is there, the principles are there. Let's say, a Senate race is capped at, I don't know, $250,000. That's even still high, but
Yeah.
$100,000. So basically, you need to be pounding the pavement. You need to be in the community. You need to be on podcasts, doing town halls. That's how you win. You don't win from running TV ads and attack ads and billboards. That's not it. I think that that's the type of legislation we could pass. I could see us, for example, putting a limit on the individual donations. So
Yeah.
right now it's $7,000. We could do a moratorium on increasing that to the point that basically through inflation it becomes nothing. There's so many different things we could do that I think we could get a lot of people excited about because frankly, we hate it. We as candidates hate raising this money and
Mhm.
all we do is give it back to other vendors. I mean, it's like you raise $1,000 and you spend like, $950 in texting fees,
Mhm.
right? And then you take that money and reinvest it again. It's not fun, right? There is a desire from the candidate side to get this money out of the process so we can have really robust primaries. And that's the problem. We don't have primaries anymore.
Do you think there needs to be restrictions on legislators, senators, trading, investing, things like that? That is a huge problem. And that's why most politicians want to be lifetime politicians. They
Mm.
don't do it because they actually love being in DC.
I see it as public service. So
Mhm.
if I love the job, I love legislating, I love helping my community. My proposal is that, like, look, we have to still retire and take care of ourselves and our families. I propose a blind trust arrangement where we can put money aside, but we're not directly trading individual
Okay.
stocks. We don't know what industries they're in.
Kind of like an IRA.
Something similar to
Yeah.
that. And so basically, the country does well, we do well. I
Yeah.
think that's aligned to needs of our constituents.
I think actually like AOC's been trying to get that through several times, but of
Yeah.
course, the people who are day trading on the side,
Yeah.
the ones who were buying Johnson and Johnson stock right before COVID hit, like
Mm.
they let that pass. And then one last question about the current Senate. What are your thoughts on the filibuster? Should it be ended?
Well, it has a very storied past and it has been used for harm. But in today's environment, I think we understand the importance of it in protecting minority rights. And I think about SAVE Act. And because you are required to have a supermajority and the individuals voting in the Senate represent an entire state, they're accountable to a much larger group of people than those in the House. It's harder to pass legislation like the SAVE Act. I think that while it slows down our progress from a civil rights standpoint, it does protect us from the worst of the worst legislation. I think it does need to remain for now, and certainly something we can look at in the future. But overall, I think it's done more good than harm. It does slow us down, though, from a civil rights perspective.
It's like it's horrible when we have the White House, but I love it right now with Trump in
Yeah.
office because it kind of is the only thing protecting us right
It's
now.
a check. It is a check that we need. And if you ever read or listen to the story about how they got healthcare passed, it was so difficult. It really was because of that supermajority of 60.
Yeah, they didn't want the ACA to. That's why the ACA is so flawed. It's because they didn't
Mhm.
want it to succeed.
So, if you are elected, you'll be stepping into a chamber with senators who have very different approaches to governing. Is there anyone currently serving in Senate whose work or leadership style you particularly respect, or someone you'd be interested in collaborating with?
Well, with her focus on accountability, I would say Elizabeth Warren. So I did have the opportunity to meet her during the caucuses when she ran for president. She was my pick. And
Mine too.
that's,
I loved her.
oh,
I
she has a
love me.
plan for it. I love
I
that.
love me some Lizzie. I love me some Lizzie.
So for sure, Elizabeth Warren, I think she's really championed smart legislation around finances and ensuring that Americans are not taken advantage of by big corporations.
So, one of the things the last several years have exposed is how much our system relies on not just the written law. They expect the norms. There's an expectation about how people in power behave. Many of those guardrails assume the elected official will, outwardly at least, respect institutional limits and act in good faith. But with those norms breaking down, the checks and balances we rely on can start to look a lot weaker than people expected. From your perspective, does this moment suggest we need to fundamentally rethink aspects of our governing structure? And do you believe the Constitution already provides those tools? And the real issue is enforcement and political will. And if reforms are needed, what kinds of structural changes would you support? For example, clear limits on executive power, congressional oversight mechanisms that really mean something, not performative, or reforms to how federal agencies operate.
The Constitution has to be a living document, and it's only about like 8,000 words long, whereas our state constitution is like 300,000 words long, right? So there is an opportunity to provide more specific guidelines, and the handshakes just we've seen in the last year don't work. What happens when you hire a special and government employee and that person steals your confidential information? Or what happens when the chief executive just does not follow judicial order? He controls the army and ICE. We have some work to do in determining what are those next steps of enforcement, like true enforcement and oversight, because we learned in the first Trump administration around the subpoena power that in the past people took that very seriously, but the Trump administration just stopped coming to Congress, right? So we've got to firm up these powers. We've got to assert the powers so that they continue to exist and provide strong oversight. I remember back in the Mueller report days, there was talk of using the sergeant at arms to start enforcing with true force these subpoenas and putting some pressure on the executive branch beyond lawsuits and holding them in contempt. We have an opportunity to put this regulation on paper moving forward.
And that would include members of Congress, too, that just come to work every day, even though they have a subpoena.
Absolutely. And the speech and debate clause. And frankly, it's been used as a big umbrella to hate speech and January 6th, inciting riots.
So let me ask this. I am a member of the DSA, so I'm a Democratic Socialist. I caucus with the Democrats because we don't have ranked choice. We don't have the ability to support a third party. As nice as it would be to have more choices, when we talk about messaging from the DNC, people are not blind to the fact that the DNC shit all over Mamdani. Said his platform, which everybody's currently running on, was against party. So they were against affordability. And then they snatched it, said winning. So
Right.
how do you reconcile that with the young crowd who are on social media and you're running as a Democrat and tell them that you're not that? I've tried to champion the fact that normally when you deal with the county level, it's a lot more progressive, right? It's not, that's not just like fun buzzwords that the DNC is trying to co-op. These are actual people who Black Lives Matter, that fuck ICE. It's a safe space for someone who identifies as far left. They can still come in and participate. People are having a hard time, especially the left, voting for a Democrat because they just feel like they're just feeding the machine again. Have you experienced that at all?
Well, when we started the campaign, we didn't even talk about party affiliation. It was really one, it was a time to learn and listen and hear what people cared about. And it was a difficult time to be a Democrat. I didn't even have Democrat, Republican, none of that on my page. It was really, these are my principles. And then over the last year, we built out a very detailed policy proposal, which you can see today. When I talk through the policies, I try to stay away from buzzwords and really talk about helping people. And you'll hear affordability coded messaging throughout. And that is where people are really struggling. If it's affordable education, healthcare, childcare, elder care, transportation, that is really the pain point that we're looking to solve. Making life accessible and so that people feel like they're getting ahead, not just getting left behind.
And I know that because, like, I've been following you for a while. You and Mark Wheeler, too, I've been keeping my eye on because he was on Reddit and I was watching you. So I have seen that on your platform that you were talking about it before November when it became the buzz thing of the DNC. So For me, you talking about affordability and stuff feels very genuine, true.
Yeah.
But it's getting people to understand that you were talking about affordability way before it became
Yeah.
co-opted by the DNC.
And what I tell people is no organization is perfect. Like I've worked for countless Fortune 500 companies, universities, whatever. The organization is not perfect, but in a situation where I have a binary choice, my principles are more closely aligned with the Democrats. But look at my principles, look at my track record of working for the community. That's where I'm positioned.
And it is about electing the right people in if you want to see the change. You can't
Yes.
expect change when it's the same people in place and then try to hold people running who are the change accountable for what's sitting in
Yeah.
office. And that's usually how I
Right.
frame it is like, you want change, you have
Mhm.
to put the right people in place. Like to do
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
go vote. So
Exactly.
It's like people who say, I'm not going to vote in the general because I didn't like the candidate. Well, did you vote in the primary? Well, no. And
Yeah.
what are you complaining about? The DNC didn't handpick this candidate.
yeah,
Yeah.
they may
Well,
have
and I also
gassed
tell
him
people,
up, but yeah.
Yeah, they backed him up, but like they didn't assign this candidate. Like
Yeah.
it's specifically people who just don't show up in the primaries and then complain
yeah,
that like drive me crazy.
I tell people all the time now that we're getting closer to the general that you don't have to be a Democrat to vote for the most qualified candidate. This is a transformational period and year. You can say, you know what, I'm a lifelong Republican, but I believe in checks and balances, and one party rule isn't doing it. I want someone else in the room to shake things up. I'm that person.
Looking specifically at the Democratic primary, voters will have several candidates to choose from. What do you think your campaign brings to this race that others don't?
Well, it's very clear from the debate over the weekend that I'm the person that has a command of the policy, challenges facing the state, how our government works and should work, and the challenges within it. Traveled to Washington 4 times last year, meeting with legislators, building relationships. Also, I have a track record of working for the people, from addressing food insecurity to education to public health, which increasingly is going to be a challenge here in our state and nationally. So I have those skills and I'm ready to serve day one.
And for listeners who want to learn more about your platform or get involved with your campaign, where can they go to find more information and connect with you?
Check out DakariLarriett.com or Dakari Larriett for Senate. And we are looking for volunteers. We're phone banking now. We're very active on social media. And we're very much looking for everyone's support.
And then finally, why does Alabama need you, Dakarai Larriett, as our next U.S. Senator?
Well, for starters, I know 3 branches of government. So I think
And you
has
live
that
here.
first
And
test.
you live here.
And I live here in Birmingham, Alabama. And I just love the state so much. I've spent the last 20 years trying to help communities get ahead. I served on the board of the Alumni Association at the University of Alabama, ensuring cost effective, equal access to education for all people. I drive for Meals on Wheels. I volunteer at the Humane Society. I know you're animal people. So look at my track record. When you start to look at the other candidates, you're going to hear a lot of, I will, I want to do, I'm going to fight for you. But what are they doing now? What have they done in the last 20 years? So look at what I've done. And I think it's very clear why Alabama needs Dakari in the Senate.
Kari, thank you so much for joining
Thank you
us this
so
week.
much.
We wish you the best of luck in the primaries. And to anyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. This is our 10th episode. And while we are still very, very small, we are so grateful for those who choose to make us a part of their week. If you've got questions, suggestions for a topic, please visit our website at bamabluedots.com. For bonus content and to connect with us directly, follow us on TikTok or Blue Sky at Bama Blue Dots. Have a great week. Bye, y'all. Bye, y'all.